She said, I want you to bend down and put your face in the dirt. And I thought, was this a game? I put my face in the dirt, and all of a sudden I felt this really cold, like iron on the back of my head. And what it was a gun. And she said, I have to kill you because your father loves you more than me. If your mother tries to kill you, that's supposed to be the woman who gives you the most love. Well, you're going to be raised in the belief system that I am not lovable.
Dear Family is a podcast hosted by Rachel Steinman, a writer, an educator, and a mental health advocate. And Rachel gets us up close and personal, so we feel a strong connection, familiarity, and comfort with her guests. So settle in and join us as we search for true healing and journey with Rachel and her most interesting guests.
Hello, everyone. It would not be fair or right to begin this podcast without acknowledging what is happening on our streets at the moment. It's an incredibly difficult time for America and the world. As a pandemic is happening, we are awakening, or many of us are awakening to the true depths of inequality that people of color are facing. And I am really grateful to my 17-year-old daughter, Amber, who's going to be old enough to vote come November, for explaining the importance of using my white privilege to be an ally. Because it's not people of color's job to educate us on the inequalities. It's our job to fight for them and use our voice to protect them and bring them up along with us. And I want to quote Amber, who said, I hope we can come together to fight for equality for people of all races, ethnicities, sexual orientations, physical abilities, income levels, etc., to bring about a better future, because Black lives matter. All right, stay safe, everyone. And thank you so much for listening and subscribing and writing those 5-star reviews. And I know you're going to really enjoy this next episode with Pirie. She is so insightful and an amazing storyteller. Without further ado, here's Pirie.
Pirie Jones Grossman was born and raised in South Texas. She grew up with a bipolar and a schizophrenic mother who struggled with drugs and alcohol. When Pirie was just 5 years old, her mother put a gun to her head and was later institutionalized. Pirie developed a depth of self-loathing and a need to be loved that would follow her into multiple marriages. But despite it all, Pirie went on to become a model, an actress, and a TV host for E!, Fox Television, NBC, CBS, and ABC, interviewing visionaries like Maya Angelou. Pirie has firsthand experience about how aging can feel disempowering and intimidating, making her the perfect co-host for her podcast, Own Your Throne, with her friend Diane Chandler. Her goal is to empower women to reject media stereotypes, reinvent themselves, own their power, their wisdom, and their value, and to embrace their inner queen. Pirie has been the co-chair for the Special Olympics International World Winter Games in Idaho, and she's worked for the Dalai Lama. She's the founder of the Love is Louder Brain Health Summit with suicide survivor Kevin Hines, focusing on teenage depression and suicide. Her TEDx talk is called How to Heal a Community from Suicide. With a master's in spiritual psychology from the University of Santa Monica, Pirie spreads her message through a blend of life coaching and event production. She's shared the stage with leading influential figures in the personal development space such as Deepak Chopra, and she writes for Thrive Global. Pirie lives in Sun Valley, Idaho, with her 2 teenagers who are on the road to becoming Olympic skiers. Pirie is here today to remind us all that love comes from within. Well, welcome, Pirie. I'm so happy to have you on Dear Family, because this is a podcast about finding mental wellness and also about our family. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and about your family, and also just how are you doing during this unusual time of sheltering at home?
Isn't that the big question for all of us?
Exactly.
I think the best word for all of us is we're reinventing and being creative And it's a big pause button that the universe and God has given us. Do you remember the commercials that we were listening to and all of the news and the politics, and people were just jabbing each other and name calling? And I don't know about you, but I was getting so tired of that. And I almost felt like the universe was listening to us, shooting off missiles, nuclear missiles at each other, threatening and doing all these things. I almost feel like God just said, all right, you know what? This is a big timeout. I want everybody to go to their rooms, just take a deep breath.
It's a reset. Yeah.
Yes. And we're going to learn how to be nice to one another again and be nice to the planet. I liken it to that. And I think once I reset my mindset to that, I really looked within myself and I thought, what changes do I need to make? This is a perfect time for me to get really quiet, get into my inner voice, stop doing all the busy things that we all do, and really look within myself and take inventory. So that's how I've treated it. And some things have been easy and some things have been really, really hard. My, children being home, and one of the biggest disappointments is my son was supposed to be graduating this year from high school. Oh gosh, Rachel, I was one of those moms years ago. I'd watch these seniors stand up and they give their senior presentations. And I was always looking forward to seeing my son do his. And instead, this whole class has had to do them online. There's no graduation ceremonies. The parties are not there, the proms. And I feel sorry for those graduates, the college graduates and the high school graduates. So that's probably been the hardest thing for me is just the disappointment. But I'm probably more disappointed than he even is. He's like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I think our kids are going to get some valuable lessons from all of this, but I think it's also totally legitimate to acknowledge that disappointment. And where are you right now?
I live in Sun Valley, Idaho. There's only 1.3 million people in the entire state. So we have a lot of outside land, and we get to go and spend time on Mother Nature and on the trails. I have to keep my kids remembering to wash their hands and social distancing because they've got this whole outdoors and they look at me like, oh, what COVID-19? There's all kinds of learning things. I also have been in this new dating relationship. We've just been dating for 8 months, and we decided to go through COVID-19 together. So he came to my place and has a guest house here, has been able to stay with me, and the kids were all excited.
Very eye-opening to go through this with somebody in a new relationship, yes. I'm sure. We're going to get into talking more about Sun Valley and about your kids and about your relationships, but I want to start from the beginning because you grew up with a mother who has schizophrenia and bipolar tendencies, and she self-medicated with drugs and alcohol. I'm wondering if you can start by telling us what happened when you were 5 years old.
Unfortunately, my parents were very young when they wed. My mother had me when she was 19 years old. In the early days, we were all in South Texas, and my dad had a roller skating rink. And so he had a lot of country bands in, and Johnny Cash, in the very beginning of his career, came to Harlingen, Texas, did a whole concert, at his rollercade. Their lives really became pretty much partiers, music, it was kind of a good time. My mother, we didn't know at the time, had mental issues. I was always very, very close to my father. And it was almost like my mom really wasn't around. When I was little, I remember she was behind closed doors in a bedroom. She came out in the evenings. She was really dressed up, ready to go party. And during the day, I had a nanny. Her name was Mama Josie. And so she really, in my mind's eye, was my mother. So I didn't really have a relationship with my mom. So one morning, I was in my bedroom and just, playing, and my brother was only a year old, and he was in a crib beside me. And I probably understand, knowing mental illness, I could tell in her eyes whether she had what I called crazy eyes. If she had crazy eyes, I knew to get out of the way, or tried to get out of the way. And then she had normal eyes, that meant she was normal. Well, she walked in my room and I looked up and immediately I could see she had these crazy eyes. And she said, she always wore these muumuus. And she said, Pirie, I want you to follow me outside in the backyard. And I was like, okay. We had huge sunflowers. They were like 12 feet tall. She said, I want you to bend down and put your face in the dirt. And I thought, was this a game? I put my face in the dirt, and all of a sudden I felt this really cold like iron on the back of my head. And what it was a gun. And she said, I have to kill you because your father loves you more than me. And she said, I'm sorry to do this. I just remember crying a lot, saying, no, Mom, don't do this. And I heard a click and I thought, honest to God, Rachel, I really thought that was the end of me.
And you're only 5.
I'm only 5 years old.
Wow.
But, I still hold those feelings viscerally within my body. And I don't even remember exactly what I said, but I just knew what I felt. And it was a tremendous amount of fear for my own mother. And then it got very quiet and she just walked away. But I remember keeping my head in the dirt for a long time because I was afraid to look at her if I did anything wrong, that she would kill me. I slowly walked back to my bedroom because I'm 5. Where am I supposed to go? I didn't know to run away or go to another house and knock on a door. That's all I knew was my own bedroom. So I went back there, crawled in my bed, and I fell asleep. My mother came back in, woke me up, and I looked at her eyes and she didn't have crazy eyes. And she just said, honey, I'm so sorry. I love you. Please don't tell your father when he comes home, but you were a little bit of a bad girl. And I remember thinking, okay. So she left. And then my dad came home. He always came home about 6 o'clock after work. And he came in my room and he's, was just talking to him. And he said, Sis, he always called me Sissy. He said, Sissy, what's wrong? I said, nothing. Everything's fine. He said, are you sure? I said, yes. Anyway, he left the room. I could hear him talking to my mom. He came back in my room and he sat on the bed with me and he said, I want you to tell me what's wrong. So I told him. And all I remember is that he got up from my bed and he shut the door and he went in and talked to my mom and they got in this huge screaming fight. They were very violent with each other, hitting her. She was hitting him back. And it was like, oh my God, this is just what I didn't want. You always think it's your fault. So anyway, this went in. My dad came back in and consoled me. I don't know what happened to my mom. I saw scratches all over his face. And then the next day we ate breakfast. My mom, I didn't see her. And then I heard some voices and I looked outside my bedroom. I was like, open the door. And I just peeked out in the living room. And I saw literally this white paddy wagon. And these 2 men came out and they were all dressed in white and they were carrying like this white thing. My dad met them at the door and my dad went to get my mom and I heard her screaming, just screaming. And I saw them get my mom, put her to the ground and they gave her a shot, a needle. And I saw them wrapping what I learned to find out later was a straitjacket on her. And she calmed down, but my dad saw me and he shut the door. But I opened it again and I saw them taking her out. And I remember her looking at me and she looked straight at me and she said, this is your fault.
Oh, Pirie. Oh, God.
And what I didn't know is my dad had to have her committed. And this was in a little town called Victoria, Texas for 3 years. She came home just once, maybe twice a year. Of course, I was afraid of her. And during that time, my dad.
And you had a 1-year-old brother?
Yes. And yeah. And
but you had a nanny or a babysitter that was able to help. Okay,
yes.
Good.
Yes. And then my dad had other friends, other friends of his wives that really took care of us and tried to help. And I had a pastor and his wife that I knocked on the door that lived about 3 houses down. They kind of adopted me. They took me to church. They really were the first ones to give me faith. I never heard about God, never heard about anything like that. It gave me comfort that someone could take care of me. It was really the seeds of the first belief of faith in me at 5 years old. But needless to say, my mom came back. We never really had a great relationship. They did all kinds of things to her. And of course, I heard her version of the story later, but she never was well, and she still isn't. We have an amazing relationship now, but dealing with anybody who has any kind of mental illness, you don't ever have a normal relationship. I had to go through a lot of healing, a lot of forgiveness, and have a lot of faith in God that I could survive this. Thank goodness I had my father. He was amazing. He took care of us. And I was blessed to have him.
What a story. And also to be so young. And I can only imagine how a 5-year-old would process something like that. We had spoken before, and you said that you grew up feeling like you weren't worthy of love. I want to talk about that shame that you felt for much of your life. And why did you feel like you were a fraud and And you had mentioned that you kept your emotional and physical breakdowns a secret.
Yes, I did. It goes back to, they say before you're 6 years old that you really have the formation of your personality and your beliefs and your values and all of that. After all of the work I've done and the healing I've done, it goes back to that moment when I saw them taking my mom away and she looked at me and said, this is your fault. I carried that belief in me. I felt like if I hadn't told my dad, if I hadn't have done whatever she meant that I was naughty, if I had just been good enough, even though my mom hurt me, I still missed my mom.
Of course.
I still wanted her. I still wanted her to love me. And I think that was the saddest part of my childhood. I never believed my mom loved me. It took her a long time to even tell me she loved me. I was in my 40s. First of all, I didn't remember the incident from 5 years old until I went to college my freshman year. And I was doing the psychology class and we went through this hypnosis, and all of a sudden there's memories, pictures of a gun and the sunflowers and all of this stuff. And I called my dad and I said, I need to talk to you about something. And I told him what I was remembering. I said, is this true? And he said, well, you need to come home and we discuss it. And I said, no, you need to come. I was going to Oral Roberts University then. I said, you need to come to Tulsa, and just you, not mom. So we talked about it. My dad said, I wish you never remembered. And I said, well, I did. This was the first time in 18 years that I knew this was something that had happened, and it was mental illness. I didn't know why my mother was so different. I just knew I couldn't trust her. I was ashamed because I didn't know how she was going to react around my friends, because she could change at the drop of a hat. And I knew that. So all of us, my brother, my sister, we all learned to walk on eggshells. And the world revolved around her. And my dad said, you guys have to take care of your mother. But I never knew why. When he came and spoke to me and he told me about all this, I was still pretty angry. When I went home at Christmas time, I had a conversation with my mom, and what she told me was pretty shocking. And she said, well, that was your fault. You did deserve it. As a matter of fact, so did your father, because you both were much closer. He always chose the children and you before he chose me. And I thought, it doesn't even make sense. What I learned then was, don't let a man love you. It could get you into trouble. I put up the barriers with any kind of love from outside sources. And of course, the most important love that we all need to have is self-love. But I didn't know who I was. All I heard was my mom telling me the jealousy was so strong with her, and not to be too much, and don't shine, hide your light, because God forbid if you shined at all or had any light or any beauty or anything, that was wrong. So that's how I started living my life. But I was so hungry for love. And that's why I had a history with a lot of relationships, we can get into later, but that was the impetus of it, is that if your mother tries to kill you, that's supposed to be the woman who gives you the most love. Well, you're going to be, raised in the belief system that I am not lovable.
Wow.
I don't deserve love. I should not shine or let my light shine.
And yet, speaking of shining, despite it all, you ended up becoming an actress and a model, and you ended up being a TV host for E! And Fox Television and NBC and CBS and ABC, and you shone bright. So how did that come about?
Well, when you think about it, I always had a personality, and I was terrible at acting, by the way. Oh my God, it was the worst. But I could play myself. I was comfortable in front of a camera. I don't know why, but that was just a medium that I was very comfortable with. And what better way to get love than to perform? And you have an adoring audience. And you become a TV personality so that you get fan letters, and you have people, you could walk to the grocery store and people recognized you and said, oh, I loved your show on E! Or I loved your show on this. I found something that gave me what I so desired. And that was love and attention. But I still hadn't learned self-love. I only learned then that if I performed, if I was pretty enough, good enough, if I was loved by television fans, then I must be lovable. So that was the perfect occupation to get into. So when people saw me, they never had any idea, belief of what was truly going on inside me. Because they thought, well, you've got this great life, you're making great money, you're, interviewing movie stars, you're on movie sets, you're dating movie stars. How could you not have self-love? Well, I wanted everything on the outside of me to give me love. I didn't know how to give it to myself.
I talk about that a lot on Dear Family, how that kind of picture perfect family on the Christmas card doesn't always match what's happening behind closed doors. And that's a perfect segue to discuss how I think it was your first marriage. You had married an uber successful Hollywood producer who made Pretty Woman, and you were hanging out with Mick Jagger, and you had this big house in Bel Air. And from the outside, it looked beyond perfect, right? You had created this life that was exactly what you thought you may have wanted. But on the inside, behind closed doors, you were suffering. Can you tell us about what kind of that breaking point was?
Yes. Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you something. It's probably going to shock some of your listeners, and that was my fourth marriage.
Oh, that was your fourth. Sorry.
It was my fourth. Because, as I said, I was so looking for love and to be lovable. And, I kept picking men, by the way, that were just like my mother. I felt like by the fourth husband, if he was the most successful, most well-known, we had the best house, and he loved me, then surely I must be lovable. So that's where that concept came from. I was working on I had another company. We had dinner, with John Travolta and his wife. He did many, many movies, Dirty Dancing. We would have all these famous actors, directors, producers that I was, his wife. So I would host these dinners, and these are the kind of people that I would be around, but I was still really empty inside. I never wanted children until I met his daughter, and she was only 4 years old. I was scared to death to meet her. And I asked him, I said, what should I do when I meet your daughter? And he said, she'll show you. So when I went to the house and she took my hand, she goes, do you want to see my bedroom? She did. And she brought out that childlikeness out of me. I learned that I had some maternal instincts in me. And it woke up the fact that I did want to have a child. I was 34 at the time. They gave me a big gift in that. Danielle was the first one. We played together. I could plan trips together. It was almost like loving my little 5 and 6 year old girl again. And isn't it funny that I met this little girl the same age that my mom put a gun to my head? And so loving her was almost a way of loving myself. So she taught me a lot about love. And then we started on the journey of, wanting to have a child. Unfortunately, the doctors kept saying I was too old, my eggs were too old, so we tried surrogates. And we tried this process of trying to get pregnant for about 2 years. It just wasn't meant to be. And I was going in and out of hospitals, and I was such a alpha female. I wanted to just make this. You're not supposed to do extractions, every other month, maybe every other 3 or 4 months. But I wanted this to happen so badly. So it ended up putting me in the hospital, and I went into a coma, and it happened twice. And my husband came and he said, I need you to stop trying to have a child, and I don't like what's becoming of you. You need to stop this. So I begged him, could we please adopt? And, he was always a very affectionate man, but when this process was happening, he got very, very cold. And he said, no, there's no way we can adopt. Why would I want to adopt using somebody else's hormones and eggs and all of that? It just seemed something that he just couldn't deal with. So I started going into a deep depression. I had a lot of fertility drugs rushing through my body. I could see this man was not being happy because I couldn't, again, perform. It scared me, and I kept trying and trying, and I didn't understand why it wasn't happening. Prayed to God. I said, please let this happen. Nothing did. From the last hospital stay, I came home, and he had a home in Sun Valley, Idaho, which is how I got here. And he took his daughter. He said, I need to take, a weekend off. And I just came out of the hospital. I wasn't even supposed to be alone. But he just got very cold and says, I need a lot to think about. So my sister came over and took care of me. And then on Monday, on Labor Day, 1998, he came home at night from Sun Valley and he saw me. I was on the sofa in our media room. And he said, and I was about 100 pounds. I was just next to nothing. I could barely get my head off the pillow. He said, I made a decision. I want a divorce. And I was shocked. I remember doing something that, Rachel, I'll never do again, but I begged him to please, let's go to therapy, or okay, I'll give up my desire to have children. I'll do whatever he wants. I'll be okay with just Danielle. And I just gave up everything. And he said, no. He says, we're gone. And I think you should go to your parents' house in Houston tomorrow. I'm going to have my attorneys draw up a divorce and we're going to come up with settlement. And this is just the way it is. And I remember the darkness and the dark hole I felt, I can't even describe. And I was always the perky girl. I was always the one that would give people hope and say, you can get through this. I couldn't find any light in me. And so I sat down on the sofa and there was about 8 bottles of pills for various things. And I thought, you know what? It would be better for me to just go home. And I couldn't even think about rebuilding my life or anything. It was just too much for me. So I swallowed 350 pills. I laid down on the sofa and I remember just put my hands over my heart and I recited the poem, Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. And if I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. I felt so much pain. I just wanted it to end. And closed my eyes, and that's what I thought. What happened is God intervened. I woke up. I was throwing up violently. I don't know how I got from the media room sofa to our bedroom, but I was like projectile vomiting. And Steve was over me trying to hold me. I was convulsing and I heard these noises in the room and these lights, and he called the paramedics and, they rushed me back to Cedars-Sinai Hospital. And I went into a coma. They pumped my stomach. I didn't wake up for 3 days. And when I did, my doctor came in and he said, how are you? And I said, okay. And I didn't quite remember what happened until this really sweet social worker came in. She was a mental advocate. And she said, do you remember what you did to yourself? And I said, no. And she told me, and I remember just crying and crying. I was like, how could I have done that? Who are you, Pirie? I was shocked. And I remember Steve coming back in the hospital room and just kind of shaking his head and just left very cold. And my sister came in. And I had some other people that came in, and I don't know what it was. I had someone come in and pray with me. And I remembered the light inside of me. And I thought, well, you know what? God intervened. So I must not be done on this planet. There must be more. I'm going to find out what that is. And I went back to my house with Steve. I packed up my bags and I left for Houston with my sister. And I stayed with my parents for a couple of weeks. And I started working with a counselor. And I thought, oh my gosh, how could this have happened to me? It was truly a dark night of the soul. So I started working with my pastor back then and remembering who I was. When we go into that darkness, we forget that we're really light. And that darkness could just be for a moment. It's not our entire lives. And, that's why I work with suicide advocates and create a task force here in Sun Valley, is because we all have the capability of going down the rabbit hole or going into a dark night. And in that instance, when you're feeling so dark, to do something and without asking for help, we all have that ability. And so that's why when people, talk to me about mental stigma, about depression, about all those things, I laugh because we're all human beings. We all have the capability of doing it. The important thing is to remember that you're not broken. You're not different. we need each other, and asking for help is there.
I think it's a really important reminder right now, especially because there's so many people struggling because of the separation. They're living alone right now because of COVID. I've had, sadly, a few different people reach out to me and tell me that they've been feeling suicidal. And I think it is really good to remember that those dark moments will pass. I want to talk about your suicide advocacy in a minute, but I also want to talk about what happened when you then decided to leave Hollywood, leave LA, and move to the beautiful Sun Valley. What happened?
Yes. You know, that part about asking God, why am I still here on the planet? So I met an amazing man and we started dating. And the first time we were together, I got pregnant, which was a miracle in itself. Now, it ended up being an ectopic pregnancy, but he was what I call my, baby daddy. And he was my fourth husband. Steve was the third. Jimmy was my fourth. And we have two beautiful children. I have a 17-year-old boy named Bowie, and I have a 16-year-old daughter named Saba. They're miracle children. I had Bowie when I was 44, and I had Saba when I was 46.
I mean, the fact that you were trying for all that fertility, and then the first time you're with this man, you get pregnant, it really is divine intervention or whatever you want to call it. That's pretty incredible. Yes.
The healing part of the story with Steve is that Steve was still coming to Sun Valley. We did have a chance to heal and make amends and have forgiveness for both of us. And he passed away 5 years later. So if I had children with him, I wouldn't have had a father to raise them. He brought me to Sun Valley. He introduced me to his beautiful daughter, who I'm still friends with. My dreams came true. Sometimes we don't get what we want. It doesn't mean that it's the end. And that's the part I learned. If I'd gotten what I want, it would not have been the best. But I didn't trust. I was too in my darkness, in my brain and my body and all the drugs that were going through me. I forgot to trust. That's the thing that I've learned so much now is we all want what we want. But I think the added phrase to the prayer is, if this is in the highest good of all, is this in the highest good for me and for others? Having my children, moving to Sun Valley, I'm still living here. I've been here for 25 years. And this event happened 25 years ago. You never know what else is in store. So if you have that moment of darkness, as you said, it will pass. You give it time, just make the awareness, this is going on. But is it true? And is this who I am? No, it's not. Just let it pass.
I think that's such a good reminder that sometimes what you think you need is not always what you need. And if you have faith, it will show itself. We'll talk about forgiveness in a minute because I do think forgiveness is something we need to remember. And clearly you have been able to forgive your mom because we're going to talk about the trip you took with your mom. But I want to talk about Sun Valley. I've been to Sun Valley. It's so beautiful. I listened to your TEDx talk, and you talked about how interesting it is that Sun Valley has this beautiful nature surrounding it, and you have art and music and education, healthy lifestyle. And yet often ski towns have a very high rate of suicide. And you mentioned something I had never heard before called a suicide belt. So can you tell us a little bit about what a suicide belt is and why you think a place as beautiful as Sun Valley has such a high rate of suicide?
As it does. And that was surprising. And there was a young classmate of my son's in 8th grade who ended his life. And then there was a whole string of kids and adults. And one year we lost 5 people. And the next year we lost 2. And I got so sick and tired of talking to my children and telling them that once again, somebody they knew and they loved had just ended their lives. I went to our local hospital to try to find out what was going on. I did research and data. So the suicide belt are Northwest states that start like with Montana and it goes all the way down to New Mexico. And that is where the largest suicide is per capita. Sun Valley in Blaine County in Idaho was actually number 1 in the country for a while. Then the rates lowered. Then now they're in the top 5. There was also an interesting article too in Outside Magazine that it's not just in Sun Valley, it's a lot of ski mountain towns. There's such a difference in the economics. There's the very wealthy and there's the people that they survive by 3 to 5 jobs. There's people that come here. They've gone through divorce. They're not making the money. They've lost hope, especially men. And then the teens, the highest group of suicide right now are girls, ages 15 to 25. And it's gone up 20% since last year. And unfortunately, these past couple months, it's gone up even more. I think personally, it's due to a lot of social media. I think it's due to they don't feel good enough. There's a lot of abuse that goes on at home. When there's people that are broken, they have inside something that they haven't healed, is what I mean by broken. They come to these beautiful towns because you're in nature and you think, well, if I just live there, then this beauty will surround me and I'll feel better. But what happens in mountain towns and with there's a great energy. And that energy just brings out what's going on inside of you. People are not working on themselves. They're not doing that inner work. And they feel like the only way out is to end their lives. So we started a task force here where we brought together doctors, nurses, teachers, first responders, a group of about 40 people. And we met once a month, and we've decided, how can we lower the suicide rate in our community? We started talking about it. What are the 5 signs? We taught children to look within their own classmates. Who's having a hard time? And taking responsibility for their own words and actions. Because people, and kids particularly, don't realize how strong their words are and what those words can do to somebody that's not feeling great or is battling something at home. We don't know. We don't know what's going on. The kids, we taught them, be careful. If you see someone who's in pain or you see someone who's acting out, go to your counselor, go to a teacher, and just gently say, I'm worried about Peter, and this is why. And you befriend them. We brought Kevin Hines in here, who was one of the biggest advocates for the National Suicide Association, who tried to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, and a sea lion saved him, basically. So he's now spent his entire life advocating for kids, particularly. So we brought him here and his team, and they met with all of the kids in all of the schools. And then afterwards, after he spoke, we broke him up into groups. And he could flag, and his team could flag what kids were in trouble. We taught kids, if you see something like that, you speak up. You don't ostracize them. You go to them and say, hey, I'm just worried about you. And I just want you to know that I'm here. You don't even necessarily need to be trained. It's just them knowing they're not alone. You are supposed to ask the question, I'm worried about you, and I'm wondering, are you considering suicide? 99.9% of the time, they will tell you. And if it's a yes, the next question is, so tell me about what you're planning to do. They will tell you. Now, before you have this conversation, you've got to contact an advocate and someone who you can put this person in touch with right away. You don't open this conversation without having a plan to get that person help. So the third thing you say is, I hear you, I care about you, and I'm going to be here and I'm going to help you. And that means even if you call the 1-800 number for National Suicide and you have someone on the phone and you put that phone to that person's ear and you let them know you are advocating for them, that in itself is a huge pause button. That's it. Just showing you care.
So similar to what you're doing, I also before COVID, was going into high schools to talk to high school kids and middle school kids about warning signs. And I think it's so important what you just said is that you ask them straight out. And you don't have to be afraid to ask them because you're not planting a seed. I think it's also important to point out that when you did this TED Talk and when you started this task force, you had not yet admitted to the general population or the public about your own story. And do you want to tell us about how the actual truth came out?
People always ask me, why did you do this? Why did you do that? Not knowing that I was a suicide survivor. I still had a lot of shame myself. I still carried the stigma. And it was Kevin Hines who sat me down and he asked me, why? I was hesitant in telling him, but he recognized that. And then I went to a leadership program in San Diego, and it was really about unleashing all your secrets because, we are as sick as our secrets. I broke down and I shared with over 100 people my story. I was so scared. I was so scared of being judged. I was so scared of, again, not being loved, people looking at me strangely. Look, and here I am, a coach. I'm a successful coach. I'm a leader in our community. Oh my God, is this going to be a big flaw? People, going to look at me and say, well, what does she have to teach? She can't even take care of herself. That was all the negative talking going in my ego saying this. But what I found was the opposite. I was able to breathe. I was truly authentic. And the story is not what I did 25 years ago, but what I did to heal and what I'm doing with it now. And that is talking about it and teaching people and helping women, helping kids. What do we do when we get these challenging situations and when we have pain? When someone wants to end their life, it's not that they want to die, it's they want to end the pain. That's it. There's so many other ways you can end the pain. And those are the tools and techniques that I learned. So I came back. Ariana Huffington is a friend of mine who had the Huffington Post. And so I called her and I said, I need to write my survivor story. And she was very quiet. She's like, I didn't know. And I said, I know, but I need to let the world know. I needed to let it out of me. So I wrote about it about a year ago and started talking about it. And people were a little shocked, but I think it made them feel better too. I had so many people saying, oh my God, there's so many times I've thought about that. When I get really depressed, when I hit those dark moments, and I said, I know you and 7 billion of us, we're all humans. But we also, remember, we're not alone. We're not alone. And that's the biggest lesson and message that I want people to know is don't beat yourself up. Don't carry this shame and guilt. There's nothing to be ashamed about. It's a weak moment. We all have vulnerabilities. What turned out to be what I thought was my weakness actually is my strength. And it feels so much better being truthful and sharing with the world what happened and how I healed. And so, I worked with kids in their 20s. They all tried to end their life one way or the other. And to see them heal and become these strong young adults and stand in the leaders and who they are is so powerful. I would have totally missed that if I hadn't told my truth. And women that I've worked with, it's such wonderful work. And I feel very blessed that I had a second chance.
And also, by you sharing your truth and being really vulnerable, it's not just freeing for you to kind of get that out and off your shoulder. It helps you connect to other people and then confide in you. Yes. I've found that with the work I'm doing. And so I so appreciate that authenticity and that vulnerability. Really quickly, I'm going to just go back to you moving to Sun Valley and starting the suicide task force, but you also started these wellness festivals that were all over the world. And you were on the wellness circuit early on. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
That started because of my own healing. I had another incident happen 7 years ago. My father died unexpectedly, who was my best friend. And I was going through another divorce. I had the tools then. What I did is I crawled in bed, I had a box of chocolate bonbons, and I watched Oprah all day. I mean, that was truly how I was trying to heal. I was listening to Eckhart Tolle. I was listening to all these, amazing speakers that she had. And that was my way of healing. A friend of mine who was actually part of the very early stages of creating Sun Valley Wellness Festival came to see me. He said, I understand you're in a lot of pain. The best thing is that you could do when you're in pain like that is to be of service. And I thought, how can I be in service when I'm feeling like this? And he said, well, why don't you come to our board meeting and see what you think? That's exactly what happened. I started thinking about, okay, instead of feeling sorry for myself and being a victim, all right, how can I empower myself? And that is through being in service with others. I started working with Sun Valley Wellness Festival on the board. I started booking all the speakers for them, and I loved it. It was also kind of a selfish thing too, because I got to meet, Brene Brown. I got to meet, Oprah. I got to meet all these people.
Wow.
And then I had a reputation. And so a gentleman who owns Telluride Ski Resort called me and said, Pirie, I'd love for you to come and, start a wellness festival here, but more of a science background. So I called my friend Deepak Chopra and told him about it. And he said, yes, of course I'll come. So it started like that. Then in Sedona, then over in Italy, and it just kind of grew. And I was having so much fun, and I was growing spiritually and healing that way myself. And then after that, I ended up going to the University of Santa Monica, as I wanted to have that one last thing that I had not done. I tried everything under the sun, and that was to forgive my mother. And as hard as I tried, Rachel, it was still at that pit of my stomach. I was still judging her, and she was acting crazy after my dad died. And I was angry at God because he took my dad and not my mom. I mean, all these horrible human feelings were coming up. So I read about this school, and it was Doctors Ron and Mary Hulnick, and they created this spiritual school. And I could get my master's in spiritual psychology. It's a 2-year program. So I went there. It was in Santa Monica, California. 1 week out of the month, I went there. I learned some new tools to heal even deeper and deeper and deeper, to the point where I truly got to the point I forgave my mom. I went to Houston to pick her up because we went on our first mother-daughter trip to the East. I remember the first time I saw her, and she saw a lot of changes in me, and she held my hand, and we would start crying together. And she said, honey, I love you. I'm so sorry. She goes, I know I was not the mother that you deserved. And I said, Mom, you were my greatest teacher. I probably wouldn't be doing the work I'm doing in the world today if it wasn't for you. And I mean that, Rachel. She was my teacher. And I can't imagine what she's going through inside her own head and her pain. And because she's still dealing with schizophrenia, she's still dealing with bipolar. And it's not easy. I don't have that. So the love and compassion I felt for her, being in her shoes, I had an understanding. That's been fully healed. And then from that came many other blessings, the coaching practice, and then what we're doing now with our podcast. Because to me, it really is all about forgiveness. If you want to be free in your life and create in your life, you have to take the responsibility for your life and stop blaming others for things happening to you or incidences. Those are all experiences, but those are all outside things. You have a choice in how you react. That was a lesson I learned at USM. So instead of blaming my mom, I looked within me. I thought, wait a minute, I am the one that hasn't forgiven her. She's doing just fine. It's me. And I kept picking men like her. And I wanted a real love, healthy relationship, but I couldn't until I forgave her and I forgave me. That was the biggest lesson that I learned going to USM. And I live my life in a totally different way now.
We're kindred spirits. My mom, I grew up very embarrassed by my mom, who's bipolar, and all of the things that she had done. And not until I was much older did I find forgiveness for her, but it ended up helping me forgive myself for how I had acted. And so I so can relate to that. What does it mean to be an empowerment coach?
An empowerment coach is someone who helps remind you that you are an empowered spirit. You're not a victim. When people come to me, they'll tell me all about their life, and it's terrible, and this has happened, and this is awful, and this person's doing this to me and can't get a job. My first question I asked, why did you create that? And they look at me, if they haven't walked out of my office by then, they look at me and they just like, what are you talking about? That's what it's about. We are magnets of energy. What we think and what we say is what we create. We did an interview with Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, who's the one who has the TED Talk about the brain. She was the one having the stroke. And she taught me a rule. It's called the 90-second rule. Whatever our thoughts are, and particularly the negative ones, give it 90 seconds. Just be aware of it. I'm having a bad thought. I'm having a depressed thought. Give it the 90 seconds to pass through your body, to pass through your brain. Just let it pass and it'll go away. As soon as that 90 seconds is over, instead of going back and thinking it again, giving it another 90 seconds, you pause and you say an affirmation, or you say something positive, the exact opposite of what the thought was. And that 90 seconds of empowerment is what changes your life. We can course correct our lives. And it all starts, like I said, our thoughts, our beliefs, our negative beliefs, our perceptions, and all of those things usually came because of childhood experiences. And they'll stay in our bodies if we allow it. So I teach people different tools like brain spotting, EMDR. We go into inner child healing. We go into forgiveness tools. I mean, it's a whole program that I teach. It's not this woo-woo stuff. There's not much difference between spirituality and science, actually, because we are so powerful. Our brains are so powerful. And just as much as we can take a negative thought and run with it, the positive way is just as powerful. And it's discipline. And you only do that and can do that when you do the first step, and that is to take responsibility. So I'm just saying, I help people take responsibility for their lives. Instead of being a victim, I help them flip the coin and say, no, we're not going to be a victim anymore. We're going to be empowered and take control of our lives because we have that ability. Even when challenges arise, or we say, well, did I create that cancer in my body? Well, I don't know. I've worked with a lot of people that they did. Unforgiveness. There's all kinds of challenges. But like I said, how do we respond to them?
You are also helping the masses through your podcast. So rather than the one-on-one with your coaching, your podcast, Own Your Own Throne, is about how it's never too late.
Right.
And that you have a choice. You had mentioned to me that you reprogrammed yourself at 55. That's very inspirational for women who might be feeling like, okay, my kids don't need me much anymore. And you talk about the beauty standards, especially someone coming from Hollywood, how it can make you feel bad that you're not,
right.
However anyone's judging you, whatever it is. And you judge, and we can tend to judge our own self even harder and be our worst critic. Tell us just a little bit about your amazing podcast, because I did listen to that episode with Jill, which I loved, and I learned so much. And I'll have all of this in the show notes. But can you just tell us a little bit about your podcast and maybe a few of the guests you've had on?
Yes. Well, I'm so excited. This is my new project. So I'm partnering with my bestie. Her name is Diane Chandler, who she also went through USM in the graduate program with me. It's how we became friends. She's 58. I'm 62, which, by the way, is another secret I held. I would never tell.
You look unreal. And so does she, by the way. Wow.
We were just, I didn't even come clean about that till about 9 months ago. And I thought, what am I doing? It's so silly.
Yeah, you own it because you're so beautiful. You look so youthful.
You're sweet. But, it's getting rid of a lot of the crap, I think, was the best beauty secret. But we came with this idea of Own Your Throne, and it's geared towards women starting at 40 years old on up. Because usually women at 40, we've gone through a divorce, our kids have already gone away, maybe we're not in the same job market anymore. We forgot our value. We forgot our worth. We start aging and we think, oh my God, we're losing our looks. And we look around commercials and it's all about youth and beauty, youth and beauty. Diane and I just sat down and thought, wait a minute, we are just feeling like we're just beginning. We're just this stride in our life, our confidence and our desire and the wisdom that we've had going through all the challenges. We need to help women remember who they are and how they can reinvent and reignite their lives. So that's what this podcast is about, is we interview women who have reinvented their lives and how they did it. So we had some of our first guests was Rita Wilson Hanks, Tom Hanks' wife.
She's awesome.
Oh, I know. She was so
I love her.
Awesome. She was great. She's just now getting into her music.
I know.
She's my age and she's doing, in Nashville and just writing her own songs. She's having so much fun.
So cool.
It's really cool. Jennifer Flavin Stallone, who's, married to Rocky. And she starts talking about what's it like being married to a movie star and you have all these young girls and she's in her 50s and she's like, oh my God, I was so worried the whole time. She goes, but now at 50, I'm like, yeah, she's got great legs. She goes, I'm a mother. I've learned to love myself. And she talks about how she's gone through that. We have an upcoming guest. It's Christy Turlington. It's going to be on the show. Fran Drescher's coming up. We have Kelly Gores, who started the Heal documentary. We have
very interesting women you have on.
Yes, and from all different types of the world. And what we do in the interviews, we talk about everything. We talk about what's it like dating in your 50s and 60s. We talk about plastic surgery. I mean, even one of the shows, we're talking about vaginal rejuvenation, if you can believe that. But we decided we're not going to stop any conversation. We're going to talk about it. What's it like being a grandmother? Is it too late to start a new business? No, it's not. How do we take care of ourselves? It's entertaining, but at the same time, it's informational. Diane and I do a little bit of coaching. We just did one yesterday with Taylor Dane, if you remember her from the 80s. She was like this disco mama, and her whole concert schedule got canceled. And so she's at home and she's like, what am I going to do about money? Paula Abdul. I mean, they're all women that we look at and we think, oh my God, they've got it together. But they share about the vulnerable times when they didn't. And then they share how they got up out of the ashes and became that phoenix again. And that it's never too late to do that.
I love it. I love it so much. And you and I have become friends on Facebook, which I love because I've gotten to see some pictures of your kids. And I saw that your kids attend a school called Classrooms Without Walls, which just sounds so cool. I have to ask you, you had mentioned that your son is an incredible skier and it will be training for the Olympics, but I watched this video of him and he was kayaking and he was blindfolded. And this was his senior project. So you have to tell my listeners about this because honestly, I was telling my husband and my kids about it.
I got to tell you, this was a big thing I had to work on at USM, and that was control and fear. Because I happen to have two kids who are adrenaline junkies, and they are national rank ski racers. So I'm watching them.
Oh, your daughter too. Okay.
Yes, my daughter too. She's just crazy. They got all this from their dad. Their dad was a junior Olympian ski racer, but so they're ski racers. They're going down the mountain, like I said, 80, 90 miles an hour. And I'm just, that's why I became a spiritual woman. Rachel, I got my knees and praying all the time. But I had this issue with control because, we as mamas, we want to just bring them all back in our wombs and keep them safe, right? But one thing I learned at USM, and this was from my teacher, Dr. Mary Hulnick, and she heard my fear and she said, listen, Pirie, you have to think of your children as spirits. They are big spirits. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. So they're here living their journey. This is not your journey. Your journey is yours. Theirs is theirs. So you've got to learn to let go. Instead of projecting all the fear on them and what they're doing, protect the love and the confidence and just let them know they're in God's hands. And so I did do that. And it was really hard for me when my son came to me and I said, what was your senior project? He says, well, I want to paddle down 15 miles on the North Fork River of the Payette, which is the most dangerous river in the world. This is where expert kayakers come around the world to go on this river. And I want to do it blindfolded. Now I almost passed it out. And I was like, no, you're not doing that. Now, his dad happens to be a world champion surf kayaker. My son happens to be the junior champion. But I had to really trust. And so Bowie broke it down, about the safety boats. He's been practicing. He was appealing to the side of me that every mother wants to know. If anything goes wrong, can someone save you? He shared with me all these different things, and his dad did too, about how it was going to happen. I went down and watched him. This was just a couple of weeks ago. And I couldn't breathe, to be honest with you. But he was so confident and he was so excited I was there. And I watched him compete and do something that afterwards, it was so beautiful. He was so zen in the boat. And they chirped. They kind of had these guys that were chirping. And so he practiced. And then he did it solo. And it was almost flawless when he did it solo because he trusted his own instincts. It's almost like, Star Wars, trust the force within you. It was exactly like that. But when he came out of the water and came up to me, his face was so lit up and he was so excited. I understood. And then he wrote his paper about it and did his presentation. And the last paragraph was, what he learned was to tell the difference between perceived and actual fear. And he said, Mom, so many people stop. They don't allow really magical moments in their life to happen because they stop it by perceived fear. That is the biggest destroyer of our lives. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's got this lesson.
So
at 7
wise.
years old. It was a lesson for me too. It took a lot of faith on my part. Listen, he was handling this brilliantly. I mean, there was a lot of training. There was a lot of practice, repetition for him to do this. It was a lesson probably more so for his mama than even him.
Unbelievable. Truly. If you could write your younger 20-year-old self. So when you were 20, were you living in Los Angeles? Oh, no, you were at...
Yeah, I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
You're in Tulsa. So if you could write your younger 20-year-old self a Dear Pirie love letter, knowing what you know now, what would you have told yourself?
I think my biggest lesson in life was learning how to love myself and the self-love, and that's enough. And from that, I would tell her, do whatever you can to be authentic to that inner voice inside of you. Don't put yourself up for vote. Don't ask someone else what you should do in life, what dream you should be doing. Are you lovable? Are all these things, putting yourself up for vote. Just listen to that inner voice and be true to yourself and know you are truly enough. No matter what experiences that you may have gone through, those are just tests and challenges. Learn that from within, that relationship with yourself, and with whether it's a higher power, whether it's universe, whether it's God, whatever, just always remember the answers are inside of you, not inside somebody else.
That's an amazing letter you would have written. And I'm sure as we're talking about your son who is 17 and getting ready to leave the nest, he may have found some of that through this senior project. So that's really great. Last question. Do you have any happiness habits? Is there anything that you do that brings you joy?
Oh my gosh, yes. Well, of course, anytime I can get my kids to do something with me, I'm so excited, especially teenagers. I'm a hiker. I love to hike. I spend a lot of time in nature. I also love to have girlfriend dinners. We have celebratory dinners. Of course, it's been a while. We've been doing them virtually now, but, getting together with, we call it the queendom, from Own Your Throne, and it's the girl tribe. Sharing the experiences and having fun is something really, really special to me. And then, of course, I love spending time with my boyfriend. I mean, he's also another adventurer, of course. We enjoy just loving one another, just showing each other, that we see each other and honoring and respecting. And how do we celebrate that? We've come up with some really creative ideas. We'll have, date nights at home. We'll cook for one another. We'll even get dressed and just show up in front of each other, because relationships are a reflection of who we are, and it's the best way we learn about ourselves.
Well, I am inspired by your lust for life. I really am. And I will have links in the show notes to your podcast and to your website for coaching. And Own Your Own Throne is on all the different platforms, correct?
Yes, it's on Apple and Spotify. And then our website is ownyourthrone.co, C-O. A girlfriend of mine, Megan McCann, wrote this book. It's called Soul Stories. And she featured 10 of us. And in this book is my survival story. But there's other stories of women who've gone through some other mental illness and challenges and stuff. And I'll send you the link to this. If you also go on ownyourthrone.co, we have a lot of freebies. So a lot of our guests have offered some immune system recipes, some fabulous brain information, all kinds of stuff. So you just go on that website, you subscribe, and then you can download various free gifts off of our website too. So I'd love to offer that to your listeners.
Great. I am so grateful for the time that you've taken to speak to me. And thank you for reminding us all the importance of loving ourselves. You really are such an inspiration. And I'm so grateful to have had this time with you.
Oh, sweetie. Thank you, Rachel. It's such a delight in meeting you and hearing your story. And I think it's an important message. And in treating mental illness, just like a broken arm or a broken leg, I mean, there's tools and techniques and things that we can do to get well, and it's offered for all of us. So that's the good news. And I appreciate and I really respect your work you're doing. So really well done.
Well, it's a mutual admiration society here then. Go enjoy that outdoor beauty that you have. And I hope to meet you in person sometime soon.
I do too. Absolutely. I appreciate it. And yeah, we'll have to have you on our podcast. That would be fun.
I would love that. I would love that. Yes. Well, you take care and we'll speak soon, I hope.
All right, sweetie. Take good
care. Bye.
Bye.
This is Rachel Steinman. For more information or to contact me with any questions, comments, or guest ideas, please check out rightnowrachel.com. That's right with a W. Thank you so much for listening, subscribing, and sharing, dear family. And if you found value in what you've just heard, I would love and so appreciate a great review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, I wish you love, happiness, and good mental health.